Think of what you can do with that. Except for a very extreme few that just want to watch the world burn. Think of what you can do with this to rally the consent of the governed to something other than what's happening now. It's on the website. There's other tools like that. We have the opportunity. There are people all over the United States waiting for your invitation to go out and hire and inspire leaders that have the knowledge and the courage to battle for the only solution big enough, which is getting right back to that same equation. Government exists to protect life, liberty, property, self-governance. There are people all over waiting for your invitation to battle for, not against anyone or anything, not to bicker and gripe and whine and moan, but to go battle for peace and prosperity, for funding education, better caring for the environment, growing the economy. There are people all over waiting for your invitation to do that right now. That's the opportunity. It's a wonderful time to be alive. We have the opportunity to reestablish those principles that were bequeathed to us, that were a gift to us. What an opportunity. What an opportunity. I'm going to come back to here. So let's jump to this now. I'm going to go here first. So see if this story sounds familiar at all, okay? Federal government's not disposing of our land. We can't educate our kids. Can't grow our economy, hoarding all of our minerals, shutting down our lands. Does that sound familiar? That was Illinois and Indiana and Missouri and Louisiana and Alabama and Mississippi and Arkansas. And you know that great western state of Florida? Right? They were as much as 90% federally controlled for decades. Look on your map right here. Are they 90% federally controlled today? No, what happened? Wouldn't that be good to know? Wouldn't that be good to know? They were 90% federally controlled for decades. They sent delegation after delegation to Washington, resolution after resolution, petition after petition. Can't educate our kids, you're not keeping your promise. Can't grow our economy, you're not keeping your promise. You're hoarding all of our ability to utilize our resources. You're not keeping your promise. They're not 90% federally controlled today. What happened? One man. It was one man, one leader who refused to take no for an answer. He was a Democrat from Missouri, Senator Thomas Hart Benton. Any of you familiar with the book Profiles in Courage? JFK? He's one of the 4 or 5 guys mentioned in that book. Thomas Hart Benton, look what he says. My election to the Senate of the United States found me doing battle for an ameliorated system of disposing of the public lands. I resolved to move against the whole system. I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I ran a bill every year for a long time, but it was more so in the speeches that I gave that changed the public mind. What's that called? You go out and give speeches to people? Education. Who can educate? Do you have to be a specialist to educate? No, right? What can we do about this? We go out and get educated, educate others, hire and inspire leaders to battle for the only solution big enough, to have that resolve, right? Look what else he says. The federal government was like a stepmother instead of a natural mother. They became a monopolizer of the vacant lands of the West. Who's he talking about? Illinois, Indiana, Florida, Arkansas. They were a monopolizer of their lands. And like all monopolies, it resulted in a hardship. Few or none of our public men were even talking about this issue before I came into the national councils. Public men are the people we elect at every level of government, right? Because job of government, right? To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men to secure these rights, right? Few of our public men were talking about it. My own voice was soon raised there against it. It's certain that a great amelioration has taken place. The sentiment of Congress and that of the people generally became more liberal in land alienation. I'm going to show you some stuff here in a little bit that will show you that when the people, where the power resides, demand that their leaders protect their life, liberty, property, and self-governance, particularly in an election year when they want a job, they listen, or they don't get the job. That's how the system works. That's why the power is here. Members of Congress from the new states should not intermit their policy or intermit their exertions or vary their policy, but should fix their eyes steadily upon the period of the speedy extinction of the federal title to all the lands within their boundaries. What does that mean? Fix their eyes steadily. Remember, he said, I resolve to move against that whole system. Where does that come from? Where does that resolve come from for leaders? Right? Right? That's where that resolve comes from. Or we can consent to what's happening now. See how this works? See how this works? It's happening. It's happening all around the West right now. Now, why did the federal government ever hold all this land in the first place? When you look at that map, I mean, don't you right on the face of that, does that make any sense at all? I mean, I had some Boy Scouts up at my Capitol on the last night of the session, and they said, Representative Ivory, what are you working on? And I gave them this card, and I said, the red represents federally controlled lands. And you know 12-year-olds, what they do, they kind of go, right? They kind of give you one of those. I mean, 12-year-olds, that's not right. And their first question, why? Why? Why does it look like that? Why? Isn't that a great question? It is. Why? Why does the federal government ever hold this land in the first place? Isn't that good to know, do you think? Yeah. So we got to go back to 1763. We're going to go back to 1763 and come forward and see what we learn about public land. Because in 1763, Treaty of Paris, the king granted the colonial charters to the states, the colonies at that time. And to 7 of them, he said, you can have claim to the western lands. 6 of them, you just get the boundary of your colony. 7 get claim to the western lands out to the Mississippi, right? So now you come fast forward, 1776, right? Lives, fortune, sacred honor. In the middle of the revolution, by 1780, they're broke. Can you imagine? You just picked a fight with the British. You just picked a fight with the most powerful, well-trained, well-funded army in the world, and now you're out of money. So what do you think the 6 are saying? Hey, you 7, go sell some of that land out there and pay for this war. What do you think the 7 are saying? Yeah, no, that's our land, and you guys got to go put your share into it. You go raise taxes. We'll sell some of our land, but you guys go raise taxes. Can you imagine? They're in the middle of the revolution with this going on. They said, you guys go raise taxes. And the 6 said, hey, wait a minute. We're putting our blood and treasure into this cause. We're putting our blood and treasure into this, and if we get through this, and you're going to be these big landed states, and we're going to try to tax our people, and they're going to leave our states and go to your state, doesn't work for us. They called it the Great Embarrassment. It was the question of the age, they said. What are we going to do about these lands, and how are we going to fund this revolution? Pretty serious problem, don't you think? We almost died at childbirth as a nation, but for the question that started this whole question about public lands, that started us down this road. But it never never intended to be this way. Let's look at that, okay? So here's what they did. On October 10th of 1780, Continental Congress passed a resolution and said, be it resolved that the unappropriated lands, which is what we still call them today, that may be ceded to the United States by the states, shall be disposed of for the common benefit. That meant to pay the debt of the war. The lands that shall be ceded to the United States by the states shall be disposed of for the common benefit, pay the debt of the war, and shall be formed into distinct republican states with the same rights of sovereignty, freedom, and independence as all the other states. Federal government, you're a trustee. You're going to hold title so we can fund the debt of the war and only make new states, and no other use or purpose whatsoever. And they said, and these lands shall be granted and settled at such times and under such regulations as may be agreed upon by Congress. You see, the regulations are for creating new states, disposing of the land to pay the debt of the war. Right? Makes sense? They win the war. Improbably. Based on this resolution, New York cedes its land to the collective of states. Virginia cedes its land. In their deeds of cession, they called them compacts. In their deeds of cession, they said, we're ceding this land to you only, create new states, use the proceeds to pay the debt, and they said, no other use or purpose whatsoever. Right in the documents, right? We win the war. By 1784, right there. By 1784, now we've got to figure out what are we doing with these lands? How are we governing these public lands as a new nation? And they go to Thomas Jefferson and say, hey, why don't you draft up the land ordinance? 1784, look what he says. He says the territory ceded or which may be ceded by the states to the United States shall be divided into distinct states. Sounds familiar, right? And in no case shall they interfere with the primary disposal of the soil by the United States in Congress assembled, nor with any ordinances or regulations Congress may find necessary for securing title in the soil to the bona fide purchasers. Think about that for a second. So in 1780, they create this trust agreement. And the states say, okay, we're going to put our land in trust, only to create new states, only to pay the debt of the war, no other use or purpose whatsoever. And we now have a claim on that, because we got to solve this whole issue of the revolution. And so when they form new states, because there's a claim on that land, when they form new states, they say, hey, new states, don't interfere with the primary disposal. Don't interfere with the federal government disposing of that land. Make sense? Yep. Don't interfere with the federal government disposing of that land, because that's how we pay the debt of the war, and that's how we create distinct republican states, because we didn't give the Congress, well, we don't even have the Constitution yet, we're getting there. And then here's Jefferson, right? This is the first time this comes up. Remember that distinct republican states, same right of sovereignty, freedom, and independence as all the other states? Jefferson, because he has a gift of words, says, and the states will be admitted on an equal footing. That's where that language comes from. That's where that language comes from. That's in every state's enabling act. In the creation of every state, it has that same language. It comes right to here. Then 1787, the Northwest Ordinance, is the enabling act. That's the creation document for Ohio and Indiana and Michigan and states like that, right? Look what it says. They'll be admitted to the federal councils on an equal footing. Remember where that came from? And it says, in no case shall the new states interfere with the primary disposal of the soil, right? Don't interfere with that trust that we set up to pay the debt of the war and only create new states. And don't interfere with the regulations for securing title in bona fide purchasers. You with me so far? Sounds familiar, right? It's all consistent. Now we get to the governing document of our nation. And in the governing document of our nation, in the Constitution, they talk about this question of the age, this great embarrassment that they've been working on from 1780. They talk about that. In Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2, it says, Congress shall have the power to keep the land forever and ever and ever if it feels like it. Doesn't say that, does it? Congress shall have the power to dispose of. Remember where that came from? Clear back in 1780 and 84 and 87. And make needful rules and regulations respecting the territory for the purpose of disposing of the land. Remember where that came from? 1780 and 84 and 87. Now this third paragraph, I dare you to go ask any lawyer friends you have what this third subclause means. And nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. What does that mean? Remember back in 1780? They formed that trust agreement, and the state said, you're only going to use it to create new states, only going to use it to pay the debt of the war, and the states have a claim on that, and the United States has a claim to pay the debt of the war. Go ask a lawyer what that means. And they'll go, because you don't read the Constitution in law school, unfortunately, let alone study it and understand what it means. Now maybe I'm just making all this up. I wonder if there's a way we could fact check what we're talking about, because it sounds pretty consistent so far, doesn't it? So maybe, oh shoot, I don't have it in there. Doggone it. The constitutional debate. The constitutional debate. You have James Wilson and Madison and Carroll all talking about this, and James Wilson says, well, let's just leave this all in the status quo. This litigated subject we've been working on since 1780 on the western lands, let's just leave it in the status quo. And he says, and let's just make sure we don't prejudice any claims of the United States. And Madison says, okay, let's say nothing on that litigated subject, but let's make sure we don't prejudice any claims of the states either as to the western territories. And so Carroll writes up the provision for the Constitution that says, nothing in this Constitution shall prejudice any claims of the United States or of the states to the western territories. And then they change that language. You get Governor Morris changes it to the language we have today. It's right in the constitutional debate. Don't prejudice the claims of the states or of the United States on this litigated subject. Let's just leave it all in the status quo. We've already been dealing with that since 1780. Still sounds consistent, doesn't it? So by 1830, debt of the war is paid off. We have no national debt. Only time in our history. How would that be? No national debt. And Congress is still holding these lands in trust. Mind you, courts, Congresses, presidents, all the way to and through our statehood called that a trust agreement. Does a trustee own title to land? Absolutely. If you're a trustee of a trust, is the title in your name? Yeah. Can you do whatever you want with the land? No. You got to do what the trust agreement says. But who pays the taxes? The trustee. Where do the tax notices go? To the trustee. If you go look on the title records in the counties for the public land, it's in the name of the federal government. But it's in trust. They're a trustee. They can't go sell the land and book the cruise. Any more than if you're the trustee for your parents or somebody's a trustee of your trust, they can't go do whatever they want with your property. They have to do what the agreement says. Right? That's exactly what this situation is. Does the federal government own title? Yeah, they do. And we'll talk about that as we keep going forward. Can they do whatever they want with it? Absolutely not.